I was born here in the U.S., but my parents were born in China, obviously, and raised in Taiwan, then came here to the U.S. for graduate school. And my parents didn't raise me as a Christian. We didn't own a Bible. We never went to church. But they raised me with very traditional Chinese values. And see, the truth of the matter was, I never really fit in with the other American boys. Obviously, I looked different. I acted different. And I had different interests. God had gifted me with music and with sensitivity. But Satan, who can't take away those God-given gifts, can certainly twist the perception of them. And I was viewed and ridiculed from a little kid as being effeminate. The first time I remember having same-sex attractions was when I was 9 years old, after I came across pornography at a friend's house. And at such a young age, I was confused and afraid of those feelings. Without any parental guidance on sexuality, those magazines gave me a distorted view of sex, and they soon became my master. So with pornography fueling my same-sex attractions, I had my first encounter when I was 16. Then when I was in my early 20s, I started secretly going out to the gay bars in Chicago. Then when I moved to Louisville to go to dental school, I no longer kept it a secret, and I lived openly as a homosexual in the gay community. So then I decided to go home and break the news to my parents, and I told them, I am gay. This crushed my mother, and to her, news of my death would have been better than this. The timing also could not have come at any worse of a time. After years of unresolved issues, and after years of living as non-Christians, my parents' marriage was a disaster. And they had already begun the paperwork for divorce. So my mother was literally at the end of her rope, and she found no more reason to live. And on the very next day, she had resolved to do the unthinkable. She was going to end her life. So she bought a one-way Amtrak ticket to Louisville, where she planned to say goodbye to me for the very last time before ending it all. But for some reason, even though she wasn't a Christian, she felt the need to go see a minister. And this minister gave her a little pamphlet on homosexuality. And with only that pamphlet and her purse, she boarded on the train thinking that death was the only answer to her problems. Never being much of a reader, she began to read this small little pamphlet which shared with her the plan of salvation, that all of us are sinners, and yet in spite of our sin, the God of the universe still loves us. And God opened up the eyes of her heart to see that just as God can love her, in spite of her sin, in spite of her weaknesses and her past, she could love me, her son, in spite of living as a homosexual. And it was on this train that my mother met God and surrendered her life to Christ. And within a few months, my father also gave his life to Christ. You see, my mother had gone to Louisville expecting to end her life. And in reality, she did. One of her favorite verses is Galatians 2:20. For I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. The life I live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. Christ living in them prepared my parents for the difficult years ahead as I headed deeper and deeper into the world of homosexuality. Spending almost all my free time in the gay clubs, I went from relationship to relationship to relationship, seeking intimacy and happiness. which I found temporarily, but it only left me feeling unfulfilled and unsatisfied. So I began experimenting with drugs. But without much money as a student, I know you guys can relate to that, without much money as a dental student, I had to support my habits somehow, and I began selling drugs. And I sold to friends, classmates, and even a professor. I thought I could live this double life of being a graduate student by day and a promiscuous drug dealer by night. But 4 months before I was to receive my doctorate, the administration expelled me. So I moved to the bright lights and big city of Atlanta, Georgia. And there, I quickly took over the drug scene, and I became a supplier to other dealers in 11 states. In addition, it was nothing for me to have multiple anonymous sexual encounters each and every day. You see, according to the world, I had it all. I had money, fame, drugs, and sex. I had exchanged the truth of God for a lie and began worshiping and serving the creature rather than the creator. Because in my world, I had become God. My parents had no idea that I was doing drugs or even selling drugs, but they knew my biggest need was to know Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior. And so they tried to reach out to me with the love of Christ. And every other day, my mother would send me these Christian cards. And there's always this quaint little one-line verse in them. And on the very bottom, she would sign each card, "Love you forever, Mom." And I would never read those cards. I would simply toss them in the trash. I wanted nothing to do with my parents, God. I didn't need any of that. My mother would then try to call me several times a week. I wouldn't answer them. She'd leave me these nice long voicemail messages, and I'd simply delete them. See, I didn't need my family. I had my friends who were gay and homosexual that I called family. I didn't need God. I didn't need religion. I had it all. So my parents realized if they were going to see me, they would have to come down to Atlanta. So one time they flew down to Atlanta, but on the second day, I kicked them out. You know, and they weren't preaching at me or pointing their finger in my face and telling me what to do and what not to do. They weren't bashing me over the head with the Bible. But just the fact that their life was so transformed that it radiated Christ, that in itself was offensive to me. And I kicked them out. And I didn't even give them an opportunity to call their friends to pick them up. But my father, before he left, he wanted to give me something. And it was his very first Bible. And as soon as they were gone, I took his Bible and I threw it in the trash can. I needed none of that. None of their newfound religion, certainly not their Bible. And after that visit, it was more than obvious to my parents that I was totally unreachable and completely hopeless. But my parents committed not to focus upon the hopelessness, but upon the promises of God. And along with over 100 prayer warriors from church, from their Bible study fellowship group, they began to cry out to God for me. Along with over 100 prayer warriors, they cried out to God for me, and my mother began to pray a very bold prayer, which was, Lord, do whatever it takes to bring this prodigal son to you. whatever it takes. Let me tell you, that's a bold prayer for a mother to pray. And yet she was desperate. In her desperation, she fasted every Monday for 7 years, and once fasted 39 days on my behalf. She literally would spend hours on her knees in her prayer closet, reading her Bible and interceding on my behalf. As many of you know, not only does God hear our prayers, but he also answers them in his own timing. And this answer to prayer came one day with a bang on my door. I opened up my front door, and on my front doorstep were 12 federal drug enforcement agents, Atlanta police, and 2 big German Shepherd dogs. I just received a large shipment of drugs in, not my largest, but they confiscated all my money and my drugs, and I was charged with the street value equivalent of 9.1 tons of marijuana. With that amount, I was facing 12 years to life in federal prison. I had started with a great future, bright future among society's finest in academia, and I found myself in the ditch among society's despised in Atlanta City Detention Center. And so in jail, I began to call all my friends. Well, little did I know that my mother knew as long as I had those type of friends around, I would find no need for God and no need for my parents. And remember, she loves bold prayers. So she prayed specifically years ago that somehow, some way, every single one of my friends would desert me. And on that day, nobody answered my phone calls.